It's a little bit after 7, and we will go ahead and call this meeting to order with 7 board members present. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
We have a motion, a motion and a second by Bill. Motion by Susan, second by Bill to approve the agenda. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. Let's see.
Wade, you have
We have one
on the consent agenda, yeah.
on the consent agenda. Do you want to?
I'd move to approve the consent agenda.
Okay.
To get the thing moving.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. Okay. At this time, as the board sets aside a few minutes for people to come and address the board, though we have one person wishing to address the board this evening, Mr. Woogie, I would remind you that we entertain 5 minutes of comments per person, and please be sure that you're not individually identifying a student or staff member.
I didn't catch all that, but it's fine. I didn't bring my glasses either.
So,
This isn't on, so I'll speak up accordingly. Now what's the old man want? I watch late night educational TV. Don't need much rest. Watch a program on pillars of the brain, 4 pillars of the brain. And it said 4 things that the brain needs to learn. Is that working now? Yeah, it is. Thank you. Is food, oxygen, exercise, and rest. The school schedule is set up where the kids don't get ample rest. I asked the kids in Sunday school class if they'd like the school day to start at 9 o'clock, and all but one of them thought that they didn't get enough rest. But rest is one of the most important, and secondly is exercise. The reason that I guess I'm hung up on this a little bit, I've over the years kind of gotten philosophies like you all do, and education is one of my things that I'm very interested in. Ideally, the class would start, in my eyes, start at 9 o'clock. Then the teacher has an hour to prepare things. A lot of times the teachers aren't in the classrooms and the kids are. And they're unsupervised, and I've watched over time. But the thing that really bothers me is in 4 days, if a body lays to rest, like in bed or something, you lose muscle tone, and actually your muscles weaken. And I think the brain is the same way. We have these kids off 2-3 months out of the summer, and they get brain lazy. I'm serious. They need to have something. I know there's sports and stuff like that, but I really like to see where the schools are open during the summer and volunteer. And I think you'd be surprised how many kids would like to go. I asked granddaughters if they would go over the summer after the 2 weeks, and they thought they needed 2 or 3 weeks off. And and I was the same way. And school wasn't my favorite thing to do, but I got where I'd like to have gone to school over the summer. But anyway, thank you for listening.
thank you, Mr. Woogie. Okay. That was the only person speaking, so we'll go ahead and move on to item number 5. The first one is AMOs, or Annual Measurable Objectives Results, presentation by Dr. Stroh.
We got a bunch.
This will be the first year that we do AMOs, and so I would call your attention to the screen. There are a number of things that we're going to look at. This is our district results on board docs, you will notice that every school's results are on board docs, and you're welcome to look at that. And I'm sure you already have. And if you have questions, I'd certainly be happy to answer those. But we're going to begin with the district results, and this is a new system, same old tests, but a new system of reporting. It's a new way for accountability, and this is more a growth model than the old AYP. AYP was a punitive model of accountability, and this encourages districts and schools to grow. Each building has an AMO of its own, and then the district as a whole has an AMO. AMO means annual measurable objective. To remember that not everybody knows the same initials that I always talk about. So there's an AMO for graduation rate at the high school. There's an AMO for participation. There's AMO for closing the gaps in populations. So you really only have to meet one of these in order to, as we used to say, make adequate yearly progress or meet a target. So if you look at ours at the top, you can see that our reading AMO was 674. Your assigned points for each student that makes progress, depending on the expectation. We were down by 12 points from the previous year. We have 16.15% of our students that were below the expectation. The good news about that is that we had over 83% of our students were above the expectation. So that's pretty remarkable. Now, I want to remind you that the old Kansas assessment, the one we've been taking for the last 10 or 12 years, the one that we'll take again this year, is a basic skills assessment. Basic skills are very, very important. We want all our kids to have, 100% of our kids to have those basic skills. As we move into Kansas College and Career Ready standards and assessments, the expectation is to go beyond those basic skills and to actually apply those skills. So what's going to happen in the next few years is our scores, just like everybody else in the state of Kansas and everybody else in the nation, our scores will drop remarkably. It will seem like our kids are performing very poorly, when in fact, they have the basic skills. We're teaching them to apply those skills. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for parents. It's going to be tough for all of us. It's going to be tough for teachers. But what it means is that we're teaching kids a new way of doing things. Instead of just basic skills, that application is critically important for our kids to be college and career ready. So it's nothing to panic about. It doesn't mean that teachers aren't teaching. It doesn't mean that kids aren't learning. It means that we're testing in another way. So then if you look at our math scores, our AMO was 668, and our API, which is the Assessment Performance Index, was 615. We were down pretty significantly by 40 points. That means that we had just over 19% of our kids were below the expectation. Okay, now we're moving from moving from the old standards to Common Core, so that would account for that little bit of a drop. And then, if you will look at the next section where you see the little green bar graphs, eventually the state expects us to get to an API of 734, and you can see where we are. And again, we've dropped just a little bit in both reading and math. Now, the interesting thing, if you go over to the right-hand side, the growth results, where you see the green bubble and the red bubble, this is the measure of cohort groups in the state of Kansas. You know, we've always said if we can measure the kids that we teach in our school for a period of time instead of every kid that comes into our school, that would be critical information, and it really is. So this shows us that in reading, we are at the 50th percentile, and that's just where we want to be, okay? This isn't percent as in we want to get 100%. This is percentile, and being in the 50th percentile, excuse me, is where we want to be. If you look at math, we barely missed it, so our bubble is red. Okay, questions that you have about this? Underneath, you'll see reducing non-proficient. That's another way of measuring our success. And so you, go ahead.
What are the comparative districts? Is it schools our size, or is it all districts? Or?
It's all districts.
Okay.
And that's a very good question. All districts dropped a little bit. Districts that are further along in terms of implementing Kansas College and Career Ready standards dropped much more than those of us who are just starting that.
Really? The ones that are further along actually dropped further.
Yes, because there are gaps.
How did they arrive at on the gap reduction results? How did they arrive at the 734 or the 719? What's the logic behind that? Because I see we've got a little bit of ways to go.
We do.
I'd just be curious on how they're calculating that, or
You get points assigned for every performance level. For example, kids at a certain grade level who score exemplary, which is the highest level a kid can score, they get 1,000 points. So for it's 1,000 points, and then it reduces from there. So kids who meet the standard might only get 500 points. Kids who and I think I have that information. The points drop drastically, but if you get exemplary, you get the most points, which is 1,000.
And then, as you said, we're going to have some rethinking and discussion. We need to educate our parents and our communities. And with the volatility we have in Topeka, as this rolls out, what things should we be aware of as we talk to our legislators to even though the numbers are dropping, as you pointed out earlier, that districts that are farther ahead in the career college readiness is going to have lower, possibly larger gaps. What things could we be ready for as we move forward? As you know, we'll have fun in Topeka here come January.
Yes, we will. A great question. Really, there are two things. One is that we're testing the old standards last year. This is a test of the old standards, which is why the districts who are further ahead dropped more. So while we're trying to measure college and career ready, we're not. We're really measuring the old standards, but we're teaching the new. Okay, so that's one thing. The big thing for me is to help people understand that kids have the basic skills. We've tested the basic skills for a number of years. That's the old standards. We're teaching the basic skills still, but in a way of application, and that's the new standards. So those two talking points I think are critical when we talk to parents, when we talk to teachers, when we talk to legislators. Just let them know that we understand that's going to happen. And it isn't just our kids, and it isn't just in Kansas, it's across the country.
Thank you.
Are you going to be addressing some schools individually, or are you just going to talk about the district as a whole?
My intention was to address the district as a whole. If you have questions separately about schools, I'd be happy to bring those up and we can talk about those.
Yeah, I was looking through the three different elementary schools and the non-performing kids. What do you see the reason that Eugene Field is 2 to 3 times more non-performing kids than in the other schools?
The interesting thing, though, if you look at the growth rate, they're right at the 50th percentile. So that's a critical part, which tells us that kids who start at Eugene Field and stay at Eugene Field perform just like other kids in the district and other kids in the state. So it's new kids moving in my view.
Those are the ones that are pulling the average down.
Uh-huh. Mhm. And and Lincoln Elementary scored in the transitional category, which is very high. Our high school moved up, so Garfield had a little bit of a drop. But overall, as a district, this is pretty much where we'd expect to be.
So are all the new kids in the district going into Eugene Field then?
Not all, not all.
I mean, it's a huge, I mean, 2 to 3 times, that's a significant difference in non-performing, and I was just curious what your take was.
When you have a smaller population and you have more new kids, it counts more against you than spreading it over, 500 kids, say at Lincoln, than a smaller number, say 300 at Eugene Field. Mhm. Great question. Other
So
questions?
what is the goal then? What should we be looking for next year? I mean, okay, so we should have a drop of what? I mean,
Mhm.
and how do we then say, yeah, the in-service time we gave everybody every Wednesday worked or didn't work? Or how do we know? I mean, we're supposed to measure things and do them by data.
And we can. This is one data point. This is the state assessments. We have a number of other data points that I'll share with you in the next few board meetings. That will be our MAP testing and so on. And that's where we're going to get a really good idea about where our kids are. In a couple minutes, I'm going to show you our ACT scores, and that will help you understand where we're going in terms of instruction and assessment. So what I can tell you about this is just information. Our teachers worked very hard and our kids learned a lot. We dropped a little bit, but we're not testing everything that we're teaching. That's what this means, and really not a lot more than that. So Amy, if you would go to the ACT. I think that will help us better understand the direction we're going in and the information that is going to be critical in the next few years. So first, if you look across the bottom of this table, you'll see that in 2013, we tested 107 kids, more kids than we've tested in the last 5 or 6 years, which is awesome. We want to test more kids. One of our thoughts in moving towards using the ACT, which is really called Aspire in the elementary grades and is appropriate to elementary grades. We're not giving this big 4-hour ACT to little third graders. I want to make that clear. Is that kids will be better prepared when they get to high school and they would take the ACT, say in 11th grade. So you can see that while we tested more kids, that in English we went up a little bit, in math we went down just a little, and then reading we stayed the same, science we went up a little bit, and overall we went up a little bit on our composite score. What's going to happen with this as we test more kids on the ACT is our composite score and each of those sub-scores will drop a little bit at first, but our goal is to really have all our kids, 100% of our kids, college and career ready, so that our hope and our belief is that if we focus on the ACT and we focus on college and career ready skills, that all our kids will be at least at that 21.7 or above the state average. The critical part, if you go down and you look at the bar graph, this is the percent of ACT tested students who are ready for college level work. And you can see across that in each of those areas that for the most part we did as a district better than the state. If you look at the final 2 bars, you'll see that 31% of our kids on the whole will do very, very well in college. Ultimately, our goal is to move that orange bar really high, up to 90 to 100. We can do that. We start preparing our kids with the new standards in preschool, kindergarten, all the way up. in about 5 or 6 years, we're going to see that really skyrocket, and that's the critical piece. Questions you have about the ACT? I think we have lots to celebrate. I think teachers do a fantastic job in preparing our kids, and while we've dropped a little bit, I think that it tells us that we're already implementing Kansas College and Career Ready standards. Okay. If there are no more questions about assessments, I'll move on to instructional programs.
Okay.
If you think of questions later, please don't hesitate to call or email me. Okay, the next presentation is instructional programs. This is a really critical part of what we do. It's our focus on student learning. We want to make sure that everything we do, everything that we decide, everything we talk about has to do with our students and about student learning. And so instructional programs meets the goal of the very first board goal, which is USD 290 will have a plan for curriculum, instruction, and assessment that is continually measured, analyzed, and refocused. And so there are some great things already happening in our district that have to do with instructional programs, things that we plan to continue to implement and improve upon. And the framework that is used for instructional programs, back up one slide, that's okay, comes from the work of Robert Marzano and McCrell Lab, and that is instructional strategies that work. And it's based on a meta-analysis of statistically proven strategies that teachers use that increase student achievement. The next slide will show you what those strategies are. Identifying similarities and differences, summarizing and note-taking, reinforcing effort and providing recognition, homework and practice, non-linguistic representation, cooperative learning, setting objectives and providing feedback, generating and testing hypothesis. This one is absolutely critical for Kansas College and Career Ready standards. A lot of time in the past, we have been able to ignore this because we just needed our kids to know the basic skills, but now this is going to be a critical strategy. And then cues, questions, and advanced organizers. These are the strategies that teachers use in their classroom every day. They don't use all 9 of them at the same time for the same subject. It's really the art and science of teaching is to know, if you go to the next slide, is to know how and when to use which strategy. And we know that the art and science, the meeting of the art and science is really the method. So for example, if you're teaching a literature lesson at high school, you may be using note-taking for a couple of days and then go back and use generating and testing questions and hypothesis. So it's really the skills of the teacher that identify which of those strategies need to be used. Okay, next slide. Here are some of our programs that we're using in the district. For English Language Arts at the elementary, we use Journeys, Holt McDougall Literature. At the upper levels, math is everyday math, and so on. I'm not going to go through all of those. What I can tell you is that we're sort of at not really a crossroads, but sort of an uncomfortable place right now because, for example, in everyday math, it is not Kansas and College Career Ready materials. What they do is they send you stuff and say, here you go, here's some more. Here's the College and Career Ready stuff, stick it in. We've looked at some programs that are stamped with sort of the approval of Common Core, College and Career Ready standards, and when we really dig into those, in fact, it's just the same old thing. So a really critical part of the work that we do with math adoption this year, we also have PE and health, and so that to an extent And as we look at our writing revision in social studies, just studying the social studies curriculum, is that we've really got to look for programs, materials, resources that really have the standards in them. And one of our academic coaches, Brad Carlson, has found some wonderful tools that are rubrics that help us look through each of those programs and identify where they are in terms of, are they at a high level for Kansas College and Career Ready standards, or are they at a low level? So that will help us with our adoption. We have a lot of things to celebrate in this district when it comes to instructional programs. Our cadres at all levels, math, reading, writing, and so on. Our academic coaches are very critical to our success as we move into college and career ready standards. Our principals are instructional leaders. Every building has building leadership teams. Our Wednesday PLCs are absolutely critical in providing teachers the time to look through, to learn the standards, and to use build your own curriculum so that we have things ready as we move through the standards. We have high quality professional development. We have a curriculum advisory council, and we have the curriculum adoption calendar. So we have some really good things that are going on in the district. Challenges, there's always challenges. And as I said earlier, to truly match the standards with the materials is difficult. We have some tools to do that, but it takes a lot of time. Early Release Wednesdays, while it's a celebration, it's also a challenge because we can pack a lot of stuff into that, and sometimes, the more you pack into something, the less gets done. So we're trying to find a balance of PLC time and working with cadres and so on, and it's very, very difficult. But that time is critical for teachers, and they work very hard during that time to get the work done. And then as we adopt new programs within our framework, making sure that those 9 strategies are included in the programs that we adopt. And then addressing the gaps. As our kids go through the different grade levels, there are going to be gaps in their learning, and so to be able to address those. In the integration in content areas, we're going to have more writing and more higher level technical reading in all subject areas. And then MTSS, while MTSS is a celebration because we have a great program, K-12 for MTSS, finding the right materials for Tier 2 and Tier 3 kids is a great challenge. The kids that are in Tier 2 and Tier 3 have a lot of different kinds of needs, and so finding programs that meet those needs is just difficult. So questions that you might have about instructional programs.
How have the strategies changed from 20 years ago, from 40 years ago? We have 9 listed.
Being so young,
I mean, just what have the older folks told you about it?
they're likely the same kinds of strategies. The questioning will be higher level, certainly, than it was probably 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. And probably 40 years ago, application was the way that kids learned. And so we're really going back to that with much higher level standards at earlier grades.
I noticed when you were in the programs portion here, there's nothing listed for science and social studies. Is that because there isn't one and they're using just?
Good question. We do. I didn't list them because it's different at different levels, and at the high school, it's different for each topic area. So I just didn't list them, and the same for social studies.
Is mastery still a word that's used in what you're doing? Is mastery come back?
Mastery, yes, absolutely. Sometimes it's called proficient, sometimes it's mastery, and defining that. But those 2 words are really meaning the same thing.
What about developmentally appropriate? That was, is that in there as well?
I don't hear that much
Oh,
anymore now that
it's
you say
kind
that.
of left.
Yeah, it kind of has, has gone away. But, you know, developmentally appropriate just means that we have kids ready for the next stage. It used to mean that all 5-year-olds were ready for certain things, and you couldn't teach them anything that they weren't ready for. And the difference now is that developmentally ready means that we know how to prepare kids. For example, a preschooler, we know how to prepare them for kindergarten. And so we have a lot more kids in kindergarten who are reading, and in first grade that are reading at higher levels, because we know how to better prepare them. So it means a little bit different.
Does MTSS address that as well? In that,
How so?
well, if they get reinforcement, if it's something they don't understand?
Absolutely. MTSS Tier 2 and Tier 3 really focus on what kids need to know. So we assess kids, we put them in levels of green, yellow, and red. And the kids who are in the red, for example, would be in small groups of about 3 and really work on those very basic skills that they need and then move up from there.
Several years ago, we changed to everyday math. Not a whole lot of years ago, but some,
Probably 5 or 6.
5 maybe, yeah, 6.
Mhm.
It was a very difficult transition and met with quite a bit of resistance. Lincoln probably bought in the best and was doing it with fidelity. And we saw their scores kind of climb tremendously using it. So now with those kids that are taught in that method, and then if we switch curriculums now, how do we make sure that that is a much more seamless, less stressful transition?
When Everyday Math and Math Trailblazers and those kinds of programs came along, it really was a new way to look at math. It was teaching math conceptually so that kids didn't just memorize an algorithm and spit it out, probably like I did and you did when you were a kid, but to really understand what the operation was and what it meant and really how to problem solve. And so the programs that we're looking at now, Envision, for example, is a very popular conceptual kind of program, and it does the same thing. It's really about problem solving and thinking through how to solve problems for kids. Giving them those basic skills, absolutely, but helping them understand that there's more than one way to solve a problem, and that rather than doing 100 problems in 15 minutes and being done, that it's more important to do a few problems and do them well and to have many steps to that problem solving. So the answer to your question is, as we move to a new program, the critical thing in any curricular area when you move to a new program is to make sure that kids understand if there's new vocabulary. Because kids will pick up, you know, math is math, and the standards are the standards, and that's the really important part. But sometimes different math programs or different reading programs or different writing programs, even science, may call something by a different name. And so helping kids understand that, that there are different words for subtraction, for example. So that's really critical.
I remember when I was teaching in Kansas City, Kansas, and we were using everyday math. I got roped in on, I had a team teaching hour where I had to teach, and I taught in a 7th grade math classroom, and we were using everyday math. And a good share of the time we were spending dealing with vocabulary, you know, the math vocabulary for what you were doing. But I guess my question that I have is, you know, in terms of math in general, if we're dealing with practice, how do we know with kids that a few problems and learning the steps will get you there to the mastery of the skill versus a larger amount of practice, you know, broken down more?
So I think, Dave, what you're asking is how do we know if, well, we know because one math problem that's a math college and career ready standard, for example, has many different levels. So it isn't something like, you know, Johnny had 5 cookies and Susie ate 2. How many cookies are left? because kids can do 100 of those kinds of problems. And really, if you know the concept and you really understand your facts, you don't need to do 100 of those or even 10 of those. So the problems are much more complex. So the student solving the problem will have to figure out whether to add, to subtract, multiply, divide, which numbers to use, and all of those kinds of things. So it's much more complex, much more like the real world. And that's really what we're aiming for, rather than the simple kinds of things that used to be assigned to school. The problems are much more complex.
I guess for me, the way I equate it as being a former band director, you know, when you would hand out a new piece of music,
Mhm.
you could try to get through it the first time
Mhm.
it was, and, you know, take it as a whole. But you weren't going to get there until you broke it down into bits and figured it out, you know, in the bit level, and then put the bits back together. Is that still generally what we're going to be doing, or is that going to be?
Even more so. That's a great analogy, because that's exactly what we want kids to do, is rather than look at, you know, the 50 notes that you're going to have to play, let's look at these 3, what does this mean, and the next 3, or whatever it is. Let's break it down into pieces and define each of those pieces, and then put it back together.
One of the areas where we've struggled has been students with disabilities.
Mhm.
Will this new curriculum adoption meet that, or help that, or will it make it worse?
You know, it's hard to say, and again, I go back to the programs. Are the programs out there that meet the needs of our students with disabilities? As far as the standards, kids can meet those standards if we give them the right kind of support. But if we don't have the programs out there that break it down so that kids with particular disabilities can learn those skills, then it's going to be even harder. Assessment for kids with disabilities is a real challenge with Kansas College and Career Ready standards, and we're not even sure where that's all going. But they've taken some things off the table, and so that's a huge concern to us.
Yeah. Well, I know the teachers weren't real happy with everyday math.
Mhm.
Consequently, the parents weren't happy with everyday math. Didn't understand it, so I hope that goes more smoothly
Mhm.
in the
Mhm.
future.
I think we have to do a lot of communicating and a lot of analyzing the different programs.
Everyday math was just hard to teach when you first got it.
Sure. Well, I'm not criticizing that, I just mean,
I loved
didn't
it.
go very well.
Okay.
One quick question.
Yes.
One of the things I heard in your presentation is, as we move to the new college and career-ready programs, and we need material and curricula, and you said something that intrigued me, that 2 people have already went and got a stamp of approval that it's approved. And we're so new, it's really not technically evolved to the appropriate evolution that we need.
Absolutely.
And I know we've always selected Journeys or Everyday Math. Are we in a transition period to where we need to work on our own team to pick the material as we move until the structured or the commercialized Everyday Math or Journeys is really there? Because I hate to spend money since it's already being developed, that it's not there yet, that they're not playing I got you through the process. Okay, you just spent $100,000, now you got to do 50 to get a revised
Good
approved
point.
program. And who's actually giving them the stamp of approval?
They are themselves. There's only 3 major textbook companies.
So
And
they're stamping
they
it
just stamp it.
themselves.
They do. They do. And the only way it's,
That's the
I'm not
very
making that up. They really
The
do.
best way to do it. I
Oh,
win.
we approve it, so it must be good.
So as we work through the adoption process, then it's very important to use a rubric to make sure that the standards are all in there at the appropriate levels. And there are some programs that out there where they're actually in there, because there were states that adopted Common Core long before Kansas did. But we just have to be very careful about selecting those. And you know, it's sort of like Pinterest and Teacher Pay Teacher. You can look at it and it can look great. And some of it is, but a lot of it is not. And so we just have to be very, very careful and be selective and use the rubrics to make sure that we have the right thing for our kids.
Well, maybe we could actually add an accrediting agency, and they have to pay us money, and
There you go.
approves it, and then we sell the approval stamp.
Yeah, we
got
could.
great teachers, we
Yeah.
should be able to do that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Okay, do we have any board reports?
Marge?
We need Marge. Where's Marge? Marge always had a board report.
Nothing's happened since last time.
We could play a tape of an old one.
Yeah, no. I'd rather hear new ones. They're more fun. Hearing none, we'll move on to item 6, which is policies, contracts, bids, estimates, agreements, and so forth. Item 6.1 is approving the negotiated agreement for 2013-2014.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the negotiated agreement for the 2013-14 academic year.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve the negotiated agreement. Do we have any additional discussion or conversation before we move to a vote?
This is 54 pages. I did not read it entirely.
You're missing some good stuff.
You are.
Is the
Yeah.
negotiated?
It's exciting reading.
Negotiating team comfortable with
We
what's
are.
been
We
presented?
are-
What were some of the changes? We all know about salary, but I don't know what some of the other changes were in the negotiated agreement.
Help, Deidre. There were no monumental changes. The evaluation
Yeah,
piece
Crowell
was probably the
really
biggest.
change.
Yeah, I know about that one.
There were some changes in the resignation penalties.
Yeah, that was one.
That was probably the next biggest thing, I think. And the others were pretty
Some little language
minor.
things,
Yeah.
kind of cleaned up the miscellaneous,
Oh, yeah, we
Oh,
fixed some
supplemental
of the
contracts and-
supplemental contract pieces and,
Yeah, we added several to the list, and then we made some language changes to help for those that want to create clubs and organizations. There's
to create a clearer path to
Process.
do that.
to achieve that, and so they can eventually get paid if it sticks around long enough. So, some good changes, and I think, obviously, great changes, I think, with the teacher salary. So, took a long time to get there, but.
Yep,
I'm glad
it
we
did.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll move to vote. All those in favor of approving the negotiated agreement signify by raising your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. Okay, moving on.
Well, could I say a little bit? I've sort of been thinking about this because I know money was a big issue and is a big issue and will continue to be a big issue. And I wrote it down so I would have it and not, and be pretty succinct about what I wanted to say. But as of today, at least the last information I got, there's a $135 million shortfall in Kansas in tax revenues due to the decrease in the income taxes.
Yeah.
And the legislature, since 2008, has reduced funding to public education. Kansas is fourth in the largest cuts to education in the nation, and that's not really where you want to be fourth. That means there are only 3 other states that have cut more than Kansas.
And that's on a percentile
Yeah,
basis.
right. Kansas in the past, and I think still, has excellent schools, and we've been in the top 10 to 12 best public schools for a very long time. We've historically, even back to the 1800s, been very proud of the education that Kansas children have received in this state. So as the candidates for various offices begin to announce their candidacy, I'd like to encourage everyone to investigate those candidates' position on public education funding.
Absolutely.
Well said, Linda, and I think it was disturbing when I heard some of our leadership already saying, since we're in the top 10 and getting good scores, the budgets must not have hurt us, and I would
Yeah.
totally argue against our leadership up there, so
That's
thank
only
you for your
because
words.
people have really
Worked their tails
worked,
off.
worked hard,
And it
Thank you
takes
for
time
that.
to show up.
yeah. So,
Thank you.
in our
Okay. All right, so let's move on to 6.2, which is approving the classified pay increases.
So moved?
We have a
Second.
motion and a second to approve classified pay increases. Any discussion on that point? Hearing none, let's move to a vote. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. And finally, 6.03 is approving administrator pay raise. And did we get that information?
Yeah, it's on the same sheet.
It's on
Okay.
it's on 602.
That's what I thought, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, it's on the same sheet.
So moved?
Have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a
And I'm
second.
abstaining from Terry's.
Okay. You want us to pull it out and, no, we're not going to do that. Yes, but all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. Okay. Item 7.1, executive session for personnel.
And how long do you want?
I think if we can do 10 minutes first,
Evaluation.
and then and we can either do it in a 20-minute session and
Okay.
then bring her in after that, we'll do it that way.
I move that the board go into executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel matters for non-elected personnel, that the board return to open meeting at 8:15 in this room. The executive session is required to protect the privacy interests of an identifiable individual. I would ask that we just have board only for the first 10 minutes, and then Jeannie and Brian. Does we need Brian?
No.
Just Jeannie this time.
Okay, for the second half
Yep.
of the.
Second.
A motion and a second to go into executive session. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. We'll be back at 8:15.
I'm going to move, we go back into open session.
Second?
A motion and a second to come back into open session. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I believe we have a personnel report to approve.
I'd make a motion to approve the personnel report. It was very well done.
Second it.
We have a motion and a second to approve the personnel report. Is there any discussion?
Just with mixed feelings on Becky Nevergold retiring,
Yeah.
you know?
Yes.
She's done a yeoman's job and
She's
touched a lot of
taken-
kids in our district, you know?
She's taken that program from just an idea to what it is now. It's amazing where it's
Yep.
gone in these years.
It is pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Okay.
The kids help daily.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I would entertain a motion to.
Got a motion on the table.
Got a motion on the table, so all those in favor signify by saying, or raising your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. Okay. Item 9, announcements.
I just have a couple. First, congratulations to the high school cross-country team who qualified for a runner-up spot at regionals. And board,
I tell you what, I don't know how long it's been since we had boys cross country do that well.
that's awesome.
That's really amazing. That's good.
It is good.
Debates do well, too.
The KASB convention is Friday, December 6th, Saturday, the 7th, and Sunday morning, the 8th. We're going to have to make reservations soon, so anybody who's interested in going, let us know. I plan to go, and it'll be in Wichita.
I would be interested in going. I think conventions are really helpful for people that are
Mhm.
new to their positions.
I went last year and it was a good place to go.
I'll check my schedule. I don't know
Okay.
at this point.
Old.
Okay.
How soon do you need to know? Or how late can you know?
I think if you let us know by November 1st, Friday, that would be fine.
Is this the hotel out by the airport?
No.
No, this is
Convention center's
the
downtown.
Hyatt.
Oh, it's downtown.
Mhm.
Okay. Downtown, Old Town?
Mhm.
Okay,
I'm doing it at the Riverwalk?
okay.
It's by the
I
Riverwalk.
know where it is then.
And that's all I have.
What was the other one? There was another one you had there. Oh, legislative policies, resolutions. What was that all about?
I included that in board docs. This will be voted on by the delegation at the assembly, at the KSB convention. There are just a couple of highlights, no surprises really. The KSB is asking that the federal and state government both fund mandates, and that fundings include increasing the weightings for the state finance formula, and more local board control. and to fully fund Capers. Those are just a couple of the highlights that I can recall.
You know, one thing, maybe I'm missing something, but I don't feel threatened as a local board. So, and it seems to me that we have plenty of control over what happens in this district. And
We-
the people that get all bent out of shape about that, I don't know where that's coming from.
We have lots of local control, but no money.
Well, and I think that's partly what some of this is, at least in my own mind, is local control in terms of finance. You know, we can do anything we want with what they send us, but
That's not much.
that's not much.
No, but you don't want it, I mean, you don't want disparity in funding. You don't
No,
want,
no.
you don't want
Agree.
local funding.
So,
And then one final thing I might mention is that in our superintendent's organizational report, typically we are able to count kids from private schools who we serve with special education services. We can count as a full FTE. We typically count 5 to 7 kids. We are able, we thought, to count 7 this year. And turned in our report, but found out that, in fact, we cannot count the 7 kids from Sacred Heart. Those kids are enrolled in USD 385, Andover's virtual school. So Andover USD 385 gets to count them for 1.05. We don't get to count them for anything. We'll have to bill Andover for the special education services, which will amount to about 7 hours a week, which is much less than the FTE that typically we get for those kids. So, kind of disappointing.
I think two comments, if you don't mind, Doctor, I'll just be direct tonight. Andover has most of the employees from Koch Industries living there. They filed their report at the last minute. There's over 4,500 kids now in their virtual school, which they marketed to the Catholic schools across the state. And to me, it's very disingenuous to go after that. Also, from a compliance issue as a Medicare auditor and an accountant, to file at the last minute. So nobody who filed their reports ahead of time would get an inkling, because it's all electronic. And if they would have filed ahead of USD 290, we would have saw that and could have worked it out to where they could have attended our virtual school. It's very genius. It's very creative. However, it's not, to me, as ethical as it should be, because it leads into the issue of vouchers and other voucher systems in the state. It was very calculated that they were the last one to file their report. So I apologize for getting too political, but you inspired me, Linda, because elections have consequences. And that just disheartens me, because it affects many districts across the state of Kansas.
And our Catholic school here has a lot of support from this community. They have huge fundraisers and things, but now that won't be here, the money won't be here for those kids. So,
Well, thank you for that report
I'll
and
talk
sharing,
to
but it just
somebody.
disappoints me, Doctor.
anything else for the good of the order?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 If you want to oppose, you can just keep sitting here.